just to tell you a little story about Sid, who's happens to be sitting right at the beginning, so we will just introduce him first. He is one of those young stars from Foundation Capital, wanted somebody who was from that demographic, called a common person, said, please can you get Sid for us? And here he is. So thank you, Sid, for making it. We're delighted to welcome you and pass it on to the next person.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Matt.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. And thanks, everyone, for joining us and to our three panelists who are here today as well. I'm going to ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves, but just very quickly on me, I'm one of the partners at Foundation Capital. We're an early-stage venture firm. We invest in a whole bunch of categories: enterprise, fintech, and crypto. I spend all of my time in IT infra and cybersecurity, so very relevant to the conversation we're going to have today. But let's get started with a quick intro of our three panelists, and I'll start with Sai.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Sai Choudhury. I support all of our AI partnerships activities. Some of that is inbound for things like data sets and APIs, and a lot of that is what we do in the ecosystem, the community, with things like PyTorch and, more importantly, Llama. And so today, excited to talk about how we're seeing Llama being used in enterprise.
Kavitha?
My name is Kavitha Prasad, and I lead perimeter protection at AWS. That includes the security services. Prior to that, I led AI strategy and execution for Intel.
And Rama, please.
My name is Rama Akkiraju. I lead the AI and automation team at NVIDIA. My mission is to transform NVIDIA's own enterprise with AI. And prior to that, I was at IBM for much of my career. I was an IBM fellow and CTO of AI Ops and worked on a number of things, including IBM Watson and IBM Research and such.
Before I go into the first question, maybe if you could raise your hand, how many of you are leveraging large language models in your companies? It looks like we have a very relevant audience here. I think the biggest question when you're leveraging large language models in enterprises is that, look, this seems like it's front and center as a technology, and it certainly has been since the ChatGPT craze that OpenAI helped to create about 16 or so months ago. But the adoption still seems pretty nascent in enterprises, and I'm very curious for all three of you, who is the typical customer persona that you're meeting with on the enterprises front? And Sai, maybe let's start with you on this topic.
Yeah, so we obviously open source Llama, our family of models, so we don't actually necessarily sell it, but being the source of it, we end up talking to a lot of different companies, startups, all the way through to the largest enterprises about how both their concerns, their applications, and things like that. And more often than not, I find myself talking to either a CIO or a CTO, and I think it's kind of relevant and of where we are in the applications and adoption. Most of this conversations with the CIOs are because they're taking a proof of concept and actually moving it to implementation to try to do what's called business transformation, but really like try to automate and make more a productivity boost for something internal. So I see a lot of that, and it makes sense, right? It's safe to start with an internal use case. If you have too many errors or hallucinations, maybe you're revealing too much data. It's still within the behind the firewall, and so there's a lot of that. There is, though, the more broader discussions that we have with CTOs, because they clearly see that this is a broader technology that's going to transform their entire business, and so what are the bets they're going to take? And obviously, being where we are as a provider of the core model, they're having the conversation from that perspective of functionality, availability, cost, and things like that.
Rama, we were talking a little bit backstage, but you're actually leveraging some of these large language models within NVIDIA. Could you talk a little bit about your role as a kind of customer persona within the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. So reporting to the CIO, my role is to transform NVIDIA's own business processes with generative AI. And that includes pretty much every business function you can think of: IT, sales, HR, marketing, supply chain, legal. All of these are fair game. So we have a number of projects that we are, some are already in production. Take engineers, for example, code assistance is a huge use case for engineers. And take site reliability engineers in IT domain, providing them root cause analysis and assistance, chatbots to interact and quickly diagnose an incident. That's a huge use case. With HR, we look at resume analysis and unbiased screening of resumes in the company. That's a huge use case that we are looking at. With sales, we are working on a number of projects related to helping sales folks prepare for customer meetings by assimilating a lot of prior meeting information and all of that together, and help them ask questions about what products NVIDIA produces and how to help them prepare with more information, relevant information about those products. That's sales. In legal, PDF parsing, understanding the legal contract agreements and what's due, who owes what to whom, by when, those kind of things, and deriving those. So across the board, and in supply chain, talk to your data kinds of initiatives. So across the board, across all business functions, we are leveraging a lot of LLMs and generative AI, chatbots, building co-pilots and such. Some of them are in production, some of them are in early stage where we've deployed, but we are doing beta, alpha testing kind of things.
Rama touched a little bit on use cases, and Kavitha, as a GM at AWS where you are running a business unit, I'm curious, what are the use cases you're seeing, whether that's the products that you're selling or actually delivering to your customers, or even internally to deliver those products in an effective way?
So that's a very good question, Sid, and I think Rama did touch a bit on it, is that we are still in the nascent stages of Gen AI from a deployment perspective for transformative use cases. Because if you really think about it, right now where they're getting used at is mostly knowledge discovery. Knowledge discovery, reasoning, summarization, getting analytics out of it. But if you think about the capabilities of Gen AI and the way it is able to get reasoning across multiple disparate data sets, like say you're combining chemistry with physics, with fashion, and trying to create reasoning behind it, Gen AI is capable of that. But the key thing is that journey is a little far off. So it's still in early stages with regards to workloads, but it has a huge capability to transform the world where you can go from 0 to 1, working with us to deliver those innovations is still a journey to be had.
And maybe share perhaps what's the top use case that you're seeing, whether that's within your division at AWS or even what you're recommending to customers within the division.
It is initially all around knowledge discovery, analytics, and making sense of data, summarization, textization. Those are the areas where it is very, very prevalent today.
Got it. Sai, obviously Meta launched Llama 3 just days ago, and we've seen several different launches of large language models over the past few months, and it's been incredibly difficult to measure whether one model is better than another, and how should a customer even evaluate one model versus another. And on top of that, how do they evaluate it based on use cases? Perhaps give us a sense for what do you recommend to customers?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the obviously, I think last July when we launched Llama 2 and open sourced it, I think we started a bit of a trend, and we're very proud of that. And we hope to have and continue to launch and the most state-of-the-art models for the community to use as well as for us to use. Obviously, there are, in the world of AI and machine learning, there are a slew of benchmarks that are out there around reasoning, coding, math, conversational following, et cetera. And, these are guidelines, and it's good to kind of get a general sense of where these are. But, most of these benchmarks, many of the models are starting to become so feature-rich that they're hitting the 80-90% of the benchmarks. So the benchmarks are, I think, a great example of, not really that relevant anymore, and it's really more about does the model fit your needs? Is it multilingual in the languages you need? And what I mean by has all the Q&A, which is the supervised fine-tuning, the RLHF as it's called, has that been done for it to be applicable for the geo that you want to roll it out on. That's a great example of picking the right model. Another is actually the trade-off between model size and compute. At the end of the day, many of us, whether you're taking this model or you're fine-tuning it, you're actually using it for a business reason. You're not doing this just for fun, right? And that compute costs a fair amount of money. So if you take a 70B Llama 3 model, it's going to run on essentially on more than one GPU for one inference pass, whereas the smaller 8B model, you can run 4 of those on one GPU in parallel. And so the cost differential is huge. And so the accuracy trade-off of like having a more nuanced answer may be required if you're doing document analysis, but may not be required in a chat kind of environment. So there are instead of focusing on the benchmarks, which are like, look, our Llama 3 70B model is benchmarking as good as Gemini Pro and almost, as these kind of closed source models. Instead of looking at that, you should actually look at form, function, and fit for the specific enterprise use case.
If I may add to
Absolutely.
that, actually. So LLMs are only, I know the focus of this panel is LLMs, but LLMs are only a small cog in the wheel when you are solving the real problem. Right? If you're talking about building copilots or chatbots, the actual accuracy, the end accuracy of the solution really depends on how well your retrieval augmented generation pipeline, information retrieval is working, and what other, how good is your agent, right? They play a significant role even before you get to using an LLM to generate a response. So it's great that you brought out the important point of that, use the right kind of LLM for solving your problem. But unless you are just using it for a use case like summarization, which is straight out of LLM use case, unless it's that, for everything else like building chatbots and such, there are a whole slew of other things that you're orchestrating. Agents, information retrieval, how you do the rephrasal, how you do the re-ranking. Building that whole pipeline still requires a lot of craftsmanship, and there are so many control points along the way that one has to still deal with, and it's important to keep in mind because solving a real-world problem is different from just using an LLM.
Yeah.
Just keeping with you, Rama, maybe talk a little bit about how you feel as a customer within NVIDIA trying to pick one large language model from another. Mm-hmm. And do you think that there should be an independent way of evaluating these models? And Sai talked a little bit about some of the different ways that they are being evaluated,
yeah.
whether that's MMLU or something else.
Yeah.
But do you think that these are fair? Or do you think that there should be some other independent governing body that helps you as a customer evaluate one over the other?
See, I don't think an independent governing body can really do justice to your particular use case with your data. No, MMLU is trying to do one part of that. I look at those numbers, but that in itself doesn't tell me how well it will do on my data in my domain for my use case. And I don't think any governing body can do that or tell me that. I have to really try it on my data and evaluate and see how well it does on my test data sets and make the decision. And yes, of course, every time a new model comes out, we'll give it a try. That's why the important point that I want to stress is that we build our architectures in such a way that we can swap out these LLMs very easily. So we have our test data sets ready. We have the ability to switch and do multiple experiments with different LLMs. And whichever does better or well in a particular use case, that's what we settle on for whatever time period, maybe 1 quarter or maybe 2 months. In this day and age, probably it's getting to be 1 sprint or 2 sprints. But the important point is, you have to evaluate on your data sets, on your use case, and decide what works best. And build your architectures in a way that they're flexible and allows you to swap these things. Because today it's this LLM, tomorrow it will be something else. We know that for sure. Today this information retrieval works well, tomorrow it could be something totally different. So you want to, and today it's one agent that works, but tomorrow it may be a completely different agent that you need. One agent that does complex query decomposition, another agent does blackboard architectures, whatever. So build flexible things so that you can mix and match and do what works best for your use case. That's what my experience has been.
picking on that point of flexibility, I think, Kavitha, at AWS, you've been pretty flexible in investing in a whole bunch of different startups who are going and building their own large language models. And I think the push that AWS has had, even through reInvent last year, has been, look, we want to make it possible for our customers to use multiple different models. So I'm curious, what are you seeing AWS recommend for its customers?
That's a very good question, Sid. And it depends, right? It depends on what you're trying to build. Say, are you building a consumer-facing app? Or are you building an enterprise-based application? Do you want to start with fine-tuned models? Do you want to fine-tune the models, or do you want to use the base models? Or do you want to go ahead and build your own models, right? Based on that, it needs to be customer outcome-based, based on what am I trying to deploy. And to earlier point that Rama made, model is a means to an end, but it's not the end. Because usually to get an application out there, it's an ensemble of models that need to come together. You need to mix your LLM with your traditional machine learning, with your probabilistic probabilistic methods, combine that with your software development and domain-specific knowledge. That's when you have an end result. So it completely depends on what you are trying to achieve, because in the land of benchmarking, nobody is second. Everybody has their own merits, right? But it depends on what you want to deploy, because these large language models, sometimes these generic models, can solve a wide swath of problems. They can write a poem like a 5-year-old, or they can write a Shakespearean novel. But do you really want that broad of an experience for your own application? Then if you are trying to solve a narrow problem, do a domain-specific model. Get the linguistics from the large model, but create a domain-specific model, because to your earlier point, compute is extremely expensive. You don't really want to burn GPUs where you don't have to, especially if you're deploying it on the edge. You need compute. Your compute is limited. Your models need to be able to run there. So it's all customer outcome based.
Maybe if I could add, because we partner with a lot of the cloud players, I'll put in a little plus for our friends over at AWS, who we work very closely with, that, we see, for example, Llama is used as an API. That's their Bedrock offering, which is probably the most, I'll call it the simplest way to access it, pay as you go, and there are customers using that, like enterprises doing that. Llama is used on something called SageMaker, where a lot of the DevOps is taken care of, but you still have to curate your data. You have to get, you typically are getting reserved instances. You're getting more capability to modify, but your investment is higher, of like a human capital. And then Llama is also available for EC2, which is you just got your sandbox and you're building like this large orchestration kind of environment that both of you spoke about. And so it really is. It's interesting because we see large language model usage even on AWS with our partnership, like span the entire range from different companies, and there's no rhyme or reason as to whether a startup or a large company is doing A, B, or C, frankly.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, Sai. Going to the topic of cybersecurity, and Kavitha, let's focus on you because you're running a business unit in that space. How are you recommending customers think about model security?
It's a very good question, Sid. And the key thing is, if you really think about, even if you abstract yourself from model security, there is interesting thing is about security for Gen AI for security, because it's very interesting the world you're in, because your models are, there can be an attack on your model. There can be an attack on your compute because it's compute intensive. There could be exfiltration of data. There could be, again, you can prompt it in a different way by giving wrong inputs and you can bias it, right? So the key thing becomes how are you setting your security, compliance, and governance around it so that you are able to protect it from the grounds up, right? It's a defense in depth strategy. So, for example, we have guardrails right on Bedrock that actually provides you first level of protection. Then how are you going to make sure your models don't get DDoSed, for example? How are you going to make sure you put in the right rules so that you're not exfiltrating the data you shouldn't be exfiltrating out? So because it's so complex and we are still at the tip of the iceberg, you really need to think about the framework on how you're going to set it up for your own protection.
Yeah. Rama, on data security, because Kavitha talked about this, how do you think about data security? as it pertains to kind of leveraging these large language models?
It's huge. When you look at an enterprise, over the years, people, depending on what all tools one uses, for example, we have Google Docs, Microsoft SharePoint, we have Slack for collaboration, we have Confluence, Jira, GitHub, and GitLab, lots of tools, right? And documents reside in all these places. Let's say we are building a chatbot that sits on our intranet that allows employees to ask general questions about the company, all kinds of things you can ask about the company. We start to ingest all this data, and what we quickly realized is that not all of the data that they have access control permissions on all of these documents, but people make mistakes. Sometimes sensitive documents are exposed with the wrong access control permissions, and for no fault of either the information retrieval systems or the LLMs, sensitive data gets exposed because now the search is so good, and the retrieval is so good, and the summarization and generation is so good. So within an enterprise, this notion of content, securing the enterprise content comes to the forefront now. Earlier, it was security through obscurity, because all these documents were there, sensitive documents were exposed, but the search tools were not good enough. So we have this false sense of security that my sensitive documents are secure. But now, no longer. Once we put these powerful tools, all the sensitive documents start leaking, and so now you have to start protecting those things. Going back to the point that you are making, Kavitha, so now you have to apply LLMs and generative AI to secure your content first before you can deploy your generative AI solutions. So, it goes both ways. So, yeah, we found that, one of the reasons why, people are still in experimental stage within companies and not going to production is because of this. Because you have to really kind of go address the tech debt and enterprise content security debt that you have in your company before you can put all these powerful tools that will help you find, summarize, answer, converse, and all of that. So it's a huge thing. So we are applying LLMs for doing enterprise content security now before we can deploy some of these Gen AI chatbots and co-pilots.
Gen AI for security.
Exactly.
On this topic of Gen AI for security, Sai and Kavitha talked about this. There's two ways that we can think about the leveraging AI and large language models. One is kind of securing those large language models. The second piece is actually leveraging them in security use cases. And certainly at Meta, I believe, if I'm correct, with Llama 3, you also launched a new security copilot. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you're thinking about kind of these specific use cases as you also push out new large language models that are open sourced?
This is our second version of our security with Llama 3. But let me highlight two different things. If you guys haven't tried it, we have a consumer AI assistant or agent called Meta AI, which first showed up as a kind of a companion in your messaging apps like WhatsApp and Messenger, and now is in a variety of different entry points on Facebook, Instagram, and you can go to meta.ai. I'm just doing a little commercial here for everybody, for the company. But within that, when you actually interact with that, it's first of all, it is, as Rama was saying, a chain of different, it's not just one LLM. To make it rich and interesting, we have multiple things. But we have a security-focused LLM to make sure that the prompts are, the malicious prompts aren't getting through or being responded to. And so it's through the building this engineering solution that we really determined that even for what we're going to open source, it makes sense to fine-tune a model, one of our Llama derivatives, for the security area. And so last December, now shifting away a little bit from how Meta is using it to a large and broader into the ecosystem, we announced the very confusingly named Purple Llama project, red teaming, blue teaming, purple teaming, and it included two different things. One, a model, which was a fine-tuned version of a Llama model that is focused on basically prompt security, both either input or output prompt. By the way, we open source this. what you're talking about is the second version of that with Llama 3. We call this Llama Guard. But in addition to that, what we've added was benchmarks. Benchmarks for cybersecurity, because that's an area we know. And what we're doing with the industry, and we invite various companies, all of you, to participate, is to build benchmarks for other modalities. You know, we don't really know about chemicals and biologics, et cetera, but we do believe that this is an area of benchmarking, which actually makes a lot of sense, where the industries together can work and put together benchmarks of what is a malicious prompt. And then you can design that into the next version of the same security model.
We're getting close to time. I have maybe two more questions. One is around this point around cost. And Sai touched on it briefly when we were talking about compute. But there's two aspects of cost for the customer. One aspect is the compute aspect, and that's to run these models. And the second aspect is the services aspect, which is to train these models, enrich them, and ensure that they're actually delivering the high-quality output that their customers, the end user, deserves and wants. How do you think enterprises are thinking about cost as they pick one model versus another, or a multi-model approach? And Rama, let's start with you again, given your use case within and use cases within NVIDIA.
Sure. Cost is huge. I tell you, sitting in a CIO organization, if you are to deploy generative AI solutions across all the use cases that I'm talking about in IT, HR, supply chain, marketing, sales, legal, and all that, and chatbots, co-pilots, summarization use cases, they're making hundreds of API LLM calls, and it could run into multiple millions of dollars of your budget. We quickly realized that when we did the estimates just with a chatbot, you could end up spending up to 24 cents with 2 LLM calls to OpenAI just for one question, right? Not even a conversation. And multiply that with the number of employees you have and the number of use cases and co-pilots, you are quickly into millions of dollars. So cost is huge. But the thing is that, there are so many alternatives now, thanks to Llama 3 kinds of open, source models, that are getting pretty good, pretty close to the best out there. So depending on the use case, you find the size of LLM that works best for you and work with that, and open source, and with multiple vendors like AWS and others hosting these models that are available, and on NVIDIA itself that are inference optimized. The costs start to come down. So then it becomes a lot more manageable. But yeah, you still, of course, pay for, running these models. Now, coming to whether you need to fine tune and, the training part of it, I would say there are lots of options. I wouldn't jump right to fine tuning models at all. I would try whether, first of all, if you're building chatbots kind of things, information retrieval, get your retrieval accuracy right. If you're retrieving the right chunks, you don't even need to worry so much. LLMs will do the right thing. Or you may want to focus on prompt engineering, or maybe p-tuning. Then there is parameter efficient tuning techniques. Fine tuning is the last resort because it's expensive. But in some cases you may have to do that to consider user feedback with reinforcement learning and such. But there are many alternatives and options, so consider those before going for the most expensive option. And with regards to LLMs, they're increasingly getting commoditized, so open source ones may just work for you. Or work with smaller models and just worry about the compute costs. For hosting, I would say.
Kavitha, I'm curious what you think. In some ways, the high cost is great for AWS because it means you make more money. In other cases, maybe your customers aren't that happy about it. What do you recommend?
So I'll tie it back to the first question you asked. Who do you talk to? You talk to CIOs and CTOs before you actually get down, because it's expensive. But having said that, to Rama's point, right, it depends again on where you want to deploy, how you want to deploy it, because not everybody needs to train these large models, because you already have so many models, even on Amazon or, all these open source models. So the need for training a brand new model versus using an existing model, you really need to make that choice. Why train when I have so many options? And the key then depends on, okay, I'm using a trained model. Now, to Rama's point, do I want to fine-tune it, or do I want to use it as is by just indexing, by providing the right data and retrieving the right results? You may not need even to fine-tune it. But then you need to go one step further and figure out where am I deploying it. Say, for example, am I deploying it on the phones? Or am I deploying it on autonomous systems? Am I deploying it somewhere where in the robotics or in the manufacturing, these things? But based on that, your compute requirements change. So you then think of other options like, do I want to quantize the model? Which means I don't need to be running at FP32 or FP16 or even BF16 for that matter. Can I run a quantized model, int8 model? I don't need that high level of accuracy, but it's good enough to keep this thing going. So quantize it, your cost goes low. So again, it depends on how you want to put, and also you may want to think about it, is the LLM model the right thing for what I'm deploying it, or do I need, or do probabilistic methods work as well? So it's always based on what you want to do, your end result, and how do you translate it is going to define the cost for what you're deploying.
In the interest of time, I'm going to go to the last question, and so I'll start with you. Obviously, TiE is an entrepreneurship conference, and we have several founders in the room today. Where do you think there's opportunity for innovation, whether that's in large language models or broadly in AI? Is there a specific area that you're excited about that you feel we need more innovation from startups here?
So, obviously the foundation models, the fact that we and others are open sourcing both kind of not just foundation models, but the instruction following models allows for startups to now take that and actually stitch that together into a complete solution. I think we're starting to see this in different fields, whether it's legal, medicine, pharma, drug discovery, energy. LLMs are a tool. They're a very powerful tool, but it opens up a new area or a new opportunity for startups to actually take these tools and engineer the best system. That's the key. It's not about, back to Rama, what you were saying, it's not just the components, pulling together and engineering the best system, having the best data, or having the best data ingestion for an industry, et cetera. I think because this is a shift in technology, it's kind of thrown everything back up in the air, and those startups that amass really good subject matter expertise and be able to put together these tools to attack the same problems of maybe finding documents on an intranet or authoring a legal document, et cetera. Those startups that can actually do this very quickly will actually pull ahead from their competitors.
Kavitha, one area you think is exciting for startups to look at?
Anywhere where there is transformative use case, right? Education, finding a new drug, or where you are able to do cross-domain analysis because LLMs are able to get that reasoning out. Think those, right? Because if it's foundational, like chat generation, everybody is going to have it. If you're not already doing it, you're behind already. So the key thing is, where is that transformation going to happen? And there is a huge opportunity there.
Rama?
I'm closely watching agentic architectures now because I'm taking LLMs for granted. They'll get better and better. Now it's really the engineering aspect of it to solve the real problems, and there we are back to good old engineering. And there, agents. What kinds of agents do you need to better understand the intent of the users? And users in a conversational context can have very complex kinds of set up multi-part questions and such. So these agents have to be really smart at understanding task decomposition, know route to the right kind of agents that can do tasks better. So to me, that's where I'm watching it closely, and that's where we're spending a lot of our time in making GenAI applications really solve the problem for the real use case that we are working at. So I very much expect that those things will evolve quite a bit in the coming few months. I guess in GenAI terminology, I can't even say years, in few months.
A few days, actually.
It could be
not even months at this point.
You can't go to, I used to think you go to vacation and you miss too much and you have to have some way to catch up when you come back. But now, when I go to sleep, I'm nervous because I don't know when I wake up what new thing has popped up that I have to catch up on. That's the pace at which things are going.
That's basically the life of a VC. We're just constantly thinking about what we're missing. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Sai, Kavitha, and Rama for joining us.
Thank you.